Oh, somebody better get ready for this word today, because I came to tell you that there are some things, oh yes, some things that only God can do in your life. You've been striving, pushing, working overtime, losing sleep, and still wondering why it hasn't broken loose yet. But let me remind you, what you are waiting for is not in the hands of man. It's in the hands of God. We live in a world that glorifies hustle. Society tells us that if we grind harder, push longer, and outwork everybody else, success will surely follow. And while there is value in diligence and perseverance, there comes a point when human effort reaches its limit. You can strategize, plan, and position yourself perfectly, but there are moments in life where no amount of striving will move the hand of God. It doesn't matter how many doors you knock on, how many emails you send, how many meetings you schedule. If it's not God's appointed time, it simply will not happen. You see, God operates on a timetable that is far above human understanding. His timing is not dictated by deadlines, social pressure, or personal impatience. You might feel like you're running out of time, but God is never late. He doesn't move according to your clock. He moves according to his divine purpose. You can't rush what God has ordained. You can't fast forward through the seasons he has set. And many times the delay isn't denial, it's development. In those waiting seasons, God is not ignoring you, he's preparing you. He's aligning circumstances, shaping your character, and removing what doesn't belong in the next chapter of your life. What looks like a pause is actually protection. What feels like stagnation is actually synchronization with his greater plan. Sometimes he withholds certain things because receiving them too soon could destroy you rather than bless you. A premature blessing can quickly become a burden if you're not ready to handle it. Look at Joseph in the Bible. He had a dream that he would rise to greatness, but before he ever sat in the palace, he was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and locked in prison. His gift didn't open the door immediately. His interpretation of dreams didn't bypass the process. But when God's appointed time came, no prison cell, no false accusation, no forgotten promise could stop him from stepping into purpose. Joseph's elevation wasn't about his effort. It was about God's perfect timing. We often exhaust ourselves trying to make things happen on our schedule. We try to manipulate situations, force relationships, and manufacture opportunities because we think it's taking too long. But forced timing creates fragile outcomes. Anything birthed out of impatience will always lack the strength to endure. We have to learn that what we build with our hands will never compare to what God releases in his time. God's timing is precise, not early, not late, exact. And while it may not make sense to us, it is always intentional. There are people God needs to move, doors he needs to open, and even hearts he needs to soften before your blessing can be fully realized. If he gave it to you too soon, you might mishandle it. If he gave it to you too late, you might miss it. But in his perfect timing, everything aligns. It's hard though, isn't it? Watching others succeed while you wait, seeing others move forward while you feel stuck. But comparison will rob you of contentment. Their season is not your season. Their path is not your path. What God has for you is for you, but it must come in his time. In those seasons of waiting, God is not only preparing the blessing for you, he's preparing you for the blessing. The growth, the pruning, the lessons you learn in the waiting room of life are essential. That's where endurance is built, where faith is stretched, and where character is refined. You can't microwave maturity. You can't shortcut preparation. Every step, every delay, every closed door is part of a process designed to make sure that when God says now, you are ready to step into it fully equipped and spiritually grounded. We often try to outrun God's process, thinking if we just do more, push harder, things will accelerate. But God is not impressed by our striving. What he's looking for is surrender, not passive waiting, but active trust. That means doing what you can, but leaving the results in his hands. It means showing up, staying faithful, remaining consistent, but understanding that the outcome is not yours to control. God can move suddenly, but often he moves slowly, methodically, and intentionally. Every delay has a purpose. Every detour has a reason. Even when it feels like he's silent, he's still working. The doors you thought were closed forever are only locked until the right moment. The opportunities you thought passed you by are still waiting in the wings for God's command. You have to trust that God's delay is not his denial, that his silence is not his absence, and that his wait is not a no. It's a not yet. When the appointed time comes, everything that has been held up, every promise that seemed distant, every dream that felt dead will suddenly come to life because it was never about your effort. It was always about his perfect divine timing. There are some wounds so deep, some scars so hidden that no human hand can reach them. You can talk to friends, family, counselors, and doctors, and while their words may offer temporary comfort, they cannot mend the broken places that exist in the depths of your soul. There are emotional fractures, spiritual burdens, and mental battles that no earthly solution can fully resolve. Medicine can treat symptoms, conversations can provide relief, but there are areas in your life where healing must come directly from the hand of God. Pain has a way of digging itself into the unseen parts of who we are, the kind of pain that lingers long after the event is past, the kind of hurt that buries itself beneath layers of busyness, accomplishments, and even smiles. You can be surrounded by people and still feel alone in your suffering because the wound is too complex for words. People can sympathize, but they cannot heal. They can offer advice, but they cannot mend. There are tears you've cried in the dark, silent prayers you've whispered, places of brokenness that only God knows exist. Physical wounds can be stitched, but emotional and spiritual wounds bleed in silence. The betrayal that left you guarded, the rejection that shattered your confidence, the trauma that replayed over and over in your mind. These are not surface level injuries. These are deep soul level fractures that require divine intervention. And the truth is, sometimes people don't even know how deeply you're hurting. You've learned how to function while fractured. You've learned how to smile through the pain, how to carry on while carrying burdens. But God sees what no one else sees. He hears the cries that never leave your lips. He knows the weight you silently bear. There are areas in your heart where no human hand can reach, but God can. He doesn't need permission to enter those places. He just needs your surrender. When human words fall short and human touch cannot comfort, God's presence steps in. He is the great physician, not just of the body, but of the mind, the heart, and the soul. His healing isn't superficial. It's complete. It reaches into the darkest corners, into the most painful memories, and begins to restore what was lost. Consider the woman with the issue of blood. For 12 long years, she sought healing from physicians, spent all she had, and yet nothing changed. Her condition not only affected her physically, but isolated her emotionally and spiritually. She was labeled unclean, cast aside, forgotten. But in one moment of divine encounter, when she reached out and touched the hem of his garment, healing flowed into places that no doctor could touch. It wasn't just her body that was healed. It was her identity, her dignity, her hope. There are some struggles that linger, not because you haven't tried to heal, but because healing is not always a process that man can facilitate. Trauma can lock itself in the body. Grief can wrap itself around the heart, and anxiety can cloud the mind. And while self-care, therapy, and support systems are valuable, there is a level of healing that transcends human effort. God can reach into places that even you have forgotten about, areas you've shut off, believing they could never be whole again. Sometimes the pain has been present for so long that it becomes a part of your identity. You start to believe that this is just the way it is. You adjust to the pain, making space for it in your life, thinking it will never leave. But God doesn't just manage pain, He removes it. He doesn't offer temporary relief. He brings total restoration. He doesn't put a bandage over brokenness. He makes it whole. There are memories that still haunt you, words spoken over you that still echo in your mind, and situations that left invisible bruises on your spirit. You may have tried to move on, tried to forget, but healing doesn't come by ignoring pain. Healing comes when God steps into that place of brokenness and begins to mend what was shattered. His healing is not bound by time. It doesn't matter how long it's been. Doesn't matter how deep the wound is. He specializes in impossible healing. Even in physical sickness, there are diagnoses that doctors can't explain and conditions they can't cure. There are people who've been told there's nothing more that can be done, but human limits are not God's limits. When medicine runs out of answers, God still has solutions. When the prognosis is grim, God's word still brings life. His healing power is not confined to what makes sense. It's supernatural. And then there's the healing of relationships, the restoration of what was broken between people. There are offenses so deep, betrayals so painful that reconciliation seems impossible. Apologies feel inadequate, and time doesn't seem to mend the gap. But God can soften hardened hearts. He can rebuild trust where it was destroyed. He can bring forgiveness where bitterness once ruled. There's also healing from guilt and shame, the kind that comes from mistakes you've made, the regret that weighs you down. People may not let you forget, and you may not be able to forgive yourself, but God's grace covers even that. He heals the heart weighed down by condemnation. He lifts the burden of past failures and offers new beginnings. No human effort can cleanse the soul or restore peace to a troubled mind. No human touch can erase years of pain, but God can. He speaks peace into storms. He breathes life into dry bones. He restores joy where sorrow has lived. His healing is whole. It doesn't leave pieces behind. It reaches every part of you. Mind, body, and spirit. There comes a point in life when every resource dries up, when every door seems bolted shut, and when every effort to move forward feels like pushing against an immovable wall. You've strategized, budgeted, networked, and exhausted every human avenue, yet the need remains. It is in these moments when logic fails and solutions seem out of reach that God reveals Himself as the ultimate provider. Not just a provider of what is predictable or convenient, but a provider in the realm of the impossible. Provision in the impossible defies human reasoning. It goes beyond what makes sense. It's when there's no conceivable way forward, and yet God makes a way. This is the kind of provision that shows up when the bank account is empty, when the opportunities are gone, when the connections have run dry. It's the kind of provision that makes you realize that your source was never your job, never your network, never your intellect. It was God all alone. Look at the Israelites in the wilderness. God delivered them from Egypt, but the wilderness was a place with no visible means of survival. No crops, no wells, no marketplace. In the natural, they should have perished. But every morning, fresh manna appeared on the ground. Every day, quail was provided for meat. Water gushed out of a rock in the middle of a dry desert. Shoes didn't wear out and clothes didn't fade. They were sustained in a barren place because God provided in ways that defied human logic. He didn't just give them enough to survive. He gave them exactly what they needed every single day. Provision in the impossible is not about abundance for the sake of comfort. It's about sufficiency for the sake of purpose. God provides what you need to keep moving forward, even when the circumstances say you should be stuck. The widow at Zarephath was down to her last bit of flour and oil, preparing to make one final meal for herself and her son before they died. But when the prophet Elijah came and asked for bread, and she obeyed, her jar of flour and jug of oil never ran dry. God met her in the middle of her lack and turned scarcity into sustained provision. Provision in the impossible doesn't always look like overflow. Sometimes it looks like just enough strength to take the next step, just enough peace to make it through the night, just enough favor to keep the doors from closing. You may be looking for a flood, but God may be sending a steady stream. And that stream may not look impressive to others, but it will sustain you in ways that nothing else could. God's provision is not limited to money or material things. He provides opportunities when you are overlooked. He provides clarity when confusion clouds your mind. He provides relationships when you feel isolated. He provides protection when danger surrounds you. He provides ideas when resources are scarce. His provision touches every area of your life because He knows what you need before you even ask. Sometimes God allows situations to become impossible on purpose. He allows every human option to fail so that when He steps in, there is no mistaking who did it. He lets the situation reach a breaking point so that His glory can be fully revealed. Like when Jesus waited 4 days before raising Lazarus from the dead. By that time, all hope was gone. People had accepted that death had won, but Jesus showed up and demonstrated that even death was not beyond His power to reverse. That was provision beyond human possibility. There are times when God's provision is hidden in obedience. He tells you to do something that doesn't make sense. Give when you feel broke. Move when it feels risky. Speak when you feel silent. And it's in that step of faith that His provision is released. Remember Peter, who toiled all night trying to catch fish, but caught nothing. Then Jesus told him to cast the net on the other side. It didn't make sense. He was the expert fisherman, but when he obeyed, the nets were so full they began to break. The provision was waiting on the other side of obedience. Provision in the impossible is also about sustaining vision. God funds what He authors. If He gave you the vision, He will give you the provision. If He called you to start the business, the resources will come. If He called you to lead the ministry, the doors will open. If He called you to write the book, the words will flow. God doesn't tease His people with dreams He has no intention of fulfilling. He provides for the vision He has placed inside you. And sometimes provision doesn't look like a blessing, it looks like a burden. Sometimes God's provision is hidden in the struggle because it is through the struggle that you gain strength. It's through the closed doors that you develop perseverance. It's through the lack that you learn to trust Him as your source. Provision isn't always wrapped in comfort. Sometimes it's disguised in challenge, preparing you for the next level. But provision in the impossible is also about divine connections. God will place the right people in your path at the right time. People you didn't know, people you couldn't reach on your own. God will touch the hearts of strangers to bless you. He will cause people to remember your name in rooms you've never entered. He will orchestrate meetings and align opportunities that you couldn't arrange if you tried. There are moments when God's provision will challenge your pride. It may come from unexpected places, through people you didn't think could help you, or in ways you didn't think you needed. But provision isn't about your comfort. It's about God's sovereignty. You have to be willing to receive it, even if it doesn't look the way you imagined. Vision in the impossible forces you to release control. It strips away self-reliance and demands trust. It teaches you that you are not your own source. Your job isn't your provider. Your relationships aren't your provider. Your intellect isn't your provider. God is your provider, and He can use any channel He chooses to get what you need into your hands. And in the moments when it seems like nothing is coming through, remember that God often works behind the scenes. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean He's not working. He's arranging, aligning, and preparing things to come together at the exact moment they need to. What looks like delay is often divine preparation. What feels like lack is often a setup for overflow. Purpose is not something that simply falls into your lap. It isn't always revealed in a single moment of clarity or handed to you fully formed. Purpose is uncovered, refined, and defined through the process, the journey, the struggles, the detours, and even the pain. It is in the process that God molds you, shapes you, and prepares you for the assignment He has placed on your life. The process is not meant to break you. It's designed to build you. Yet many people despise the process because it doesn't feel like progress. It feels slow, painful, confusing, and uncertain. But it's in that very process that purpose begins to rise to the surface. Look at how God operates throughout Scripture. He rarely reveals the full picture all at once. He gives glimpses, fragments, pieces of the puzzle, but not the entire vision. He told Abraham he would be the father of many nations, but He didn't tell him about the years of waiting, the doubt, and the family conflicts. Joseph had a dream of ruling, but wasn't shown the betrayal, the pit, the false accusations, and the prison. David was anointed king, but went back to tending sheep and later spent years running for his life. The promise was given, but the process was necessary to prepare them for the fulfillment. Purpose revealed through process means you have to go through some things that don't make sense. There are seasons of waiting where it feels like nothing is happening, but God is working even when you can't see it. He is developing endurance, teaching humility, and strengthening character. The waiting room of life feels uncomfortable, but it's in the waiting where God is aligning circumstances and maturing you for what's next. If you step into purpose too soon, without going through the necessary process, you won't have the capacity to sustain it. The process often includes pain, and pain has a way of becoming a classroom for purpose. It teaches lessons that comfort never could. Pain sharpens focus, exposes weaknesses, and deepens empathy. The very thing you thought would break you often becomes the foundation of your calling. Some of the greatest assignments are birthed out of the most painful experiences. What crushed you today could be the platform God uses tomorrow. The heartbreak, the rejection, the betrayal, it all becomes part of the story that fuels your purpose. But purpose isn't only revealed in pain, it's also uncovered in obscurity. There are seasons when God will hide you. He will tuck you away where no one is applauding, no one is validating, and no one is noticing. That hidden season is critical. It's where discipline is formed, where motives are purified, and where skills are sharpened. It's easy to crave the spotlight, but the spotlight will expose what hasn't been developed in the dark. God hides you not to punish you, but to protect you while He prepares you. The process is not a straight line. It includes detours, delays, and disappointments, but none of it is wasted. Every step, even the ones that seem off course, is woven into God's plan. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before leading Israel. Those years seemed wasted, but God was preparing him to navigate the desert with millions of people. What feels like a detour is often divine direction in disguise. Purpose revealed through process also requires surrender. You must be willing to let go of your own timeline, your own plans, and your own comfort. God's process is uncomfortable because it confronts your limitations. It stretches your faith, demands patience, and requires trust. You don't get to dictate how the process unfolds. You don't get to skip steps. What God is building in you takes time. Sometimes the process includes failure. You will make mistakes. You will fall short. But even failure is a part of the process. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, yet that failure didn't disqualify him. It humbled him and prepared him to lead the early church with compassion and strength. Failure teaches you resilience, accountability, and grace. It breaks pride and makes space for God's power to work in your weakness. Purpose is also revealed in serving. Before David wore a crown, he served in the field. Before Joseph ruled, he served in Potiphar's house and in prison. Serving humbles you, teaches you obedience, and aligns your heart with God's will. Many want to lead, but few want to serve. But serving is often the doorway to purpose because it teaches you to prioritize God's agenda over your own. The process also involves pruning. God will cut away things, relationships, habits, and mindsets that cannot go with you into your purpose. Pruning feels painful because it's a cutting away, but it's necessary for growth. Dead weight cannot enter your next season. God removes not to hurt you, but to make room for what's coming. Purpose revealed through process means trusting God even when it feels like nothing is happening. It's believing that every moment, every tear, every unanswered prayer is working together for your good. God is intentional. He wastes nothing. The doors that closed, the people who left, the plans that failed, all of it is part of His divine process to shape you for your purpose. Even in moments of confusion, when you're asking God, why am I going through this? He's still in control. The process refines vision, clarifies direction, and deepens dependence on Him. You may not understand it now, but in time, you'll see how every piece fits together. The very things that seemed to delay you were actually developing you. Purpose requires process because without the process, you wouldn't be ready for the weight of your calling. Without the challenges, you wouldn't have the strength to stand. Without the hidden seasons, you wouldn't have the depth to lead. The process strips away pride, builds endurance, and aligns your heart with God's will. The process is often longer than we want, harder than we expect, and more complex than we understand. But it's in that very process that God reveals not only what He has for you, but who He has created you to be. There's a kind of peace that cannot be explained, a peace that makes no sense when you look at the circumstances surrounding you. It's the kind of peace that shows up in the middle of chaos, in the eye of the storm, when everything around you is falling apart and yet somehow you are not. It's not a peace that comes from comfort, security, or certainty. No, this is a peace that transcends logic, defies explanation, and stands firm when every reason says you should be breaking down. This is the peace that surpasses all understanding. This peace doesn't come from the absence of problems. It comes from the presence of God. It doesn't come when everything is going well. It shows up when things are going wrong. It's a divine calmness that grips your soul when fear is trying to take over. It's the stillness in your spirit when anxiety is knocking at your door. It's the assurance that even though you don't know how, God knows exactly what He's doing. This peace doesn't ignore the storm. It silences the storm inside of you. Think about Jesus asleep on the boat while the disciples were panicking during the storm. The winds were howling, the waves were crashing, and the boat was being tossed. The disciples, seasoned fishermen who knew the dangers of the sea, were terrified, yet Jesus slept. How could he sleep through such chaos? Because he carried a peace that surpassed understanding. His peace wasn't tied to the condition of the sea. It was anchored in the authority he had over it. That same peace is available to you. It's the peace that holds you together when the diagnosis is bad, when the job is gone, when the relationship has ended. It's the peace that tells you be still when everything around you is shouting panic. It doesn't always change the situation, but it changes you in the situation. You may still be in the fire, but you're not consumed by it. You may still be walking through the valley, but you're not overtaken by fear. Peace that surpasses understanding means that people will look at you and wonder how you're still standing. They'll wonder how you're smiling, how you're moving forward, how you haven't lost your mind. It doesn't make sense to them because they're measuring peace by circumstances. But your peace isn't rooted in circumstances, it's rooted in Christ. This peace doesn't need validation from your situation because it's sustained by God's promises. This peace guards your heart and your mind. The mind is where anxiety tries to take root. It's where doubt begins to whisper lies and fear magnifies problems. But the peace of God becomes a shield, guarding your thoughts, protecting your emotions, and silencing the enemy's voice. It keeps you from spiraling into panic. It holds your heart steady when everything in you wants to give up. It stabilizes your mind when the weight of life feels too heavy to bear. Peace that surpasses understanding doesn't deny reality. It just refuses to let reality dictate your hope. It acknowledges the facts, but still believes in God's truth. It recognizes the mountain, but still believes it can be moved. It sees the storm, but still believes Jesus can speak. Peace, be still. This peace doesn't pretend that pain isn't real, but it knows that pain isn't permanent. It understands that God is greater than what you're facing. This kind of peace comes through trust. Trust that God is in control even when you are not. Trust that He is working behind the scenes even when you can't see it. Trust that He knows the end from the beginning. It requires surrender. Letting go of the need to figure everything out, to control every outcome, to understand every step. It's in surrender that peace flows. Peace that surpasses understanding also comes from knowing who you are and whose you are. When you understand that you are God's child, that He is your defender, your provider, your protector, you don't have to live in fear. When you know that God is for you, it doesn't matter who or what is against you, that knowledge anchors you. It keeps you grounded when life tries to knock you off course. This peace is cultivated in the secret place, in prayer, in worship, in God's presence. The more time you spend with God, the more His peace begins to saturate your life. It's not a one-time experience. It's a continual flow that comes from staying connected to Him. His presence becomes a refuge, a hiding place where your soul can rest. Peace that surpasses understanding is not passive, it's powerful. It's not weak, it's resilient. It's the kind of peace that enables you to walk through fire and come out not even smelling like smoke. It's the kind of peace that gives you the strength to stand firm when everything is shaking. It's the kind of peace that allows you to sleep, not because the problem is solved, but because you know God is working. This peace can't be manufactured. You can't buy it, you can't fake it, and you can't earn it. It's a gift from God freely given to those who trust Him. It's supernatural, which means it won't always make sense to you or anyone else. You might not understand why you're calm, but that's the beauty of it. It surpasses understanding. Peace that surpasses understanding will carry you through seasons of uncertainty. It will stabilize you when your plans fall apart. It will quiet your spirit when fear tries to overwhelm you. It will hold you steady when the future looks unclear. It doesn't require you to have all the answers because it reminds you that God does. This peace doesn't mean you won't feel pain or experience hardship. It means that pain won't consume you and hardship won't define you. It means that even in tears, you can have hope. Even in loss, you can have assurance. Even in waiting, you can have rest. Peace that surpasses understanding also brings clarity. When your mind is at rest, you can hear God more clearly. When anxiety is silenced, wisdom can flow. Fear clouds judgment, but peace brings perspective. It allows you to make decisions not out of panic, but out of purpose. This peace becomes a testimony. People will see it in you and be drawn to it. They will want to know how you can be so steady, so calm, so assured. And in that, God is glorified. Your peace becomes a witness to his power. It speaks louder than words. It shows that your faith is not in fleeting things, but in an unshakable God. This is the peace that meets you in the midnight hour when sleep escapes you. It's the peace that surrounds you when bad news arrives. It's the peace that anchors you when life is unpredictable. It is steady, unmovable, unshaken.